Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is LEAFSTYLE, and we have a very special guest today. I'm really excited to sit down with Weldon Angelos. Welcome, Weldon. Really appreciate it. This season, we're focusing on free the people. And we want to give a big shout out to One Plant who sponsored this interview, sponsoring our Free the Plant, Free the People theme this season. And what a better person to speak to. Incredible story. We're going to dig into it. Weldon Angelos, welcome, welcome. And let me give you a proper introduction, a proper bio. Weldon is a injustice survivor, father of two, a reform advocate, activist, founder of the Weldon Project and Mission Green, and someone with an incredible story that we're going to dig into and hear more about. So thank you, Walden. Appreciate it. Really excited to speak to you and hear this story and share it with our community. And we are, because I forgot to say this, LEAFSTYLE, right? Where cannabis, community, and education collide. So again, welcome, Weldon. Tell me, let's get right into it. How are you doing?
Let's do it. I'm doing good.
Really
good.
All right, tell me, where did your relationship with cannabis start? Where and when?
So I first experimented with cannabis after Dr. Dre dropped the Chronic and Doggy Style. You know, the weed leaves. I was talking about smoking weed. You know, I had never smoked weed yet. I think I was like 13 or 14. And I'm like, man, I got to get me a sack and try this out, see what's so good about it. And it was over with from there. You know, it got me really creative. You know, it actually led me into the music industry. And so, yeah, 14 years old, first time experimenting.
Wow, wow. That sounds like an experience of mine as well, right? When that Chronic hit, it changed everything. It was just a soundtrack to and created a certain vibe. And once you got involved, it was hard to turn the other way, right?
Absolutely.
So you're speaking about your music career, Extravagant Records. Talk to us about that. Take us back to your life back in 2003, 2004. What was your life like then?
Yeah, well, you know, after, you know, working in the 90s, mid 90s to the early 2000s, I was cultivating my relationship with a number of people in the industry. And, you know, I had struck a record deal with the help of Snoop. You know, he really, you know, took me under his wing and helped me out. And, you know, I got a nice deal. I signed some big artists, was working with, you know, all the biggest names in the industry. I signed one of Tupac's Outlaws. I signed one of Snoop's artists. And, you know, he had a really dope soundtrack come out with Snoop to a movie we were working on. And it all came crashing down, you know, late 2002 when, you know, the federal government was looking, I was bringing, you know, Snoop and Mac Dre and all these people to my hometown of Salt Lake City. You know, I relocated to LA, but I was bringing them back, you know, to Salt Lake, and they didn't like that. You know, they looked at me like I was bringing Ebola into Utah, and they had to keep me out. And so they seen Snoop coming out here, and it was something different. And they sent an informant to try to get to Snoop by trying to prosecute me and pressure me. So they sent an informant to purchase some cannabis from me. He bought $300 worth on 3 occasions. It wasn't about the money at this time. You know, I was probably had $1 million, you know, from all the music I was doing. I had already put out 3 albums. I was doing well. And they used those 3 marijuana charges to try to pressure me, hoping that it would lead to people like Snoop. When it didn't, they made an example out of me.
Wow, wow. So that's what I was going to ask you. So you were born and raised in Utah?
Yeah, I mean, well, I lived in different places. I got, you know, family from all over. And so I moved around, but I lived in Salt Lake City, you know, for most of my life. And I relocated to LA in 95 when I was 15. Trying to make it in music, you know, and sure enough, it happened. I bumped into, you know, all the people who were working at Death Row Records and just started befriending people like the Dog Pound, the Outlaws. And, you know, it just went up from there. When Mac Dre got out of the feds, you know, we started working together. Everything was going nice. And, you know, when I came back home and tried to, establish something there. It didn't work out too well.
Yeah, so now your career's taken off. You have some good things in projects on deck, and you're starting to bring some of these entertainers, rappers to Salt Lake City, right? Talk to us a little bit about the process. You talked about the informant. Talk to us, walk us through those steps. How did this even get to the point where you're getting arrested?
So initially, this informant, he was facing like 25 years. He had multiple priors. He was a violent gang member, at least according to the government. And they used him, trying to get, to rappers. And so, I was their target. Like, okay, if we pressure this dude, we gonna be able to, get all these other people. And so after the 3 transactions, I didn't have time for dude. He was from my neighborhood and from way back in the day. He had just got out of the prison. He had done 5 years on, whatever his charges were, and he caught another case, didn't want to go back. And so he was trying to get immunity. And they said, look, I seen the videotape, his little first interview, and he said, I could tell you about murders, unsolved murders. I could tell you about, methamphetamine coming in the state from Mexico. I can tell you all this stuff. They said, we don't care. We want Weldon Angelos. And he was like, what? Like, I got these guys. They're like, no, we want him. And he said, okay, I'll try it. And after the 3 transactions, I didn't have time for dude. I said, stop calling me. I'm not going to mess around with $300 worth of weed. I'm over here, getting ready to do a song with Eminem, and I'm releasing albums with Snoop. We got an unreleased Pac verse. So we got so much going on. I don't got time to be messing around. So I told him to stop calling me, and he was blowing me up every week, just trying to get me to sell guns to him, coke, meth, anything. And I just stopped talking to him. And so 6 months down the line, he had nothing else to offer, and they had nothing on me but $900 total worth of weed. And so they had to make it a bigger case. And so when they arrested me, they seen that I own legal firearms. And so they took those firearms and they backdated the police reports and added those firearms allegations into the drug transactions. And now they're saying, oh, the informant saw those firearms back when you did the transactions. And now I'm facing 100 years in prison under the federal mandatory minimums. And that's how my case spiraled out of control when they realized he's not going to fold on anybody. We're not going to get Snoop. They spent 1.5 years investigating me, all this federal resources. They had to have something to show for it. And so they charged me up the ass, a 20-count indictment from 3 transactions, and they stacked my charges. So I'm going to trial facing 105 years of mandatory imprisonment.
Wow. So let's talk, because that was a lot there. These 3 charges, what was the initial cannabis sales? What was the amount?
So it was $300 worth. I don't remember how much it was back then, not a lot. And so, we're talking about under $1,000, and even back then that ain't shit. So, they didn't have anything. I mean, this is it. This is all they got. So when they arrested me and seen that I own a firearm, that's when things spiraled out of control, because they said, okay, now we got something on him. We can use these. And so they updated the police reports that just mentioned marijuana, nothing about guns or anything else. So they updated the police reports with this informant and his handler and said now he remembered seeing those guns at the time of the transactions. Now we're talking 55 years minimum on just those 3 charges.
Wow. And those were legal guns? Those were guns?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, we had legal guns. They were in a gun safe. I had a permit, and they found some bulletproof vests that we used for rappers. Because remember after Pac got killed and Big, so when we would do shows, we would vest our artists up. We were trying to protect them. And so, they were the feds try to use that to paint me as this big, dangerous, drug kingpin. And the trial ended up turning into a war on hip hop, because at trial, the prosecutor started his closing arguments rapping a Mac Dre song that I produced. Wow. And telling the jury, this is what this case is all about.
Right. You have to go back to that time. This is early 2000s. This is Utah. And it appears that they may have been targeting more what you were doing in your music career than what you were doing in cannabis, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, it was both. They didn't want that weed smoking, rap culture out here, and I was the bridge because I was working with mainstream artists, and I was bringing them here, and things were blowing up for me. Just signed a major deal, everything was going good, but they didn't want that here, and so they did what they had to keep it out.
Right, right. So now you're charged with these incredible sort of facing incredible time. You said a total of potentially 105 years.
Yeah, so they charged me with the 3 counts of the marijuana sales. So it's 5 years for the first one and 25 years for the other 2 each. So 55 years on just those. And then when they arrested me, they said, okay, you got guns in your home. We're going to say these guns were used to protect drug money and marijuana. And now that's another 50 years just for the guns at home. I had 2 different guns. And so now with the other charges, we're talking about 105 years. They even charged me with money laundering for paying rent 1 month. They were just totally just throwing everything at me to try to pressure me. And when the pressure didn't work, they said, okay, we're taking you to trial. And they actually superseded my indictment. At first, these were just threats. I was only charged with the marijuana. The guns were just threats saying, okay, you do what you want us to do. We're going to drop these charges. And me and my attorney laughed at him like, the fuck, what are you talking about? My friend murdered somebody and got 8.5 years. He killed him over a parking stall. I just got a little bit of weed. Like I couldn't believe that this could happen in America. Like we're talking a little bit of weed, even back then, but you're talking, 55 or 105 years. That doesn't happen. I didn't believe it.
Right. So we're speaking about that a little bit. Your mind at trial, they're going to put all sorts of threats in your face. And this is the feds, right?
Yep. This is the feds. And I never had no interaction with the feds. I had all my homeboys were growing up. They were in the state system and they were going in there for shootings, home invasions, and getting out in 2 years, 3 years, 1 year. And so I'm like, I'm not even going to go to jail. I didn't believe it. My attorney's like, well, these are mandatory, but I think we can beat them. And I'm like, mandatory? I'm not believing that. Like, this is a threat. They're trying to scare me. Until you go through the system and see the laws and see, how many people are in there, like, this is real. And a lot of people don't know that. If I didn't know it, imagine how many other people don't know about what's going on.
And this was a first-time offender case?
Yeah, I had a juvenile gun charge, but it was expunged. So legally, I was a first offender.
Right, right, right. So you're sitting at trial. You're like, no way possible. What was the plea they offered you?
15 years, 15 or 16 for one marijuana sale. They said, plead to this $300 marijuana sale, and you got to accept 15 years, not with parole. There's no parole in the Fed. So 15 years means you're doing, at least like 13. You get a little bit of good time. And I'm like, I just launched a career. I got 2 young sons. I'm not going away for 15 years for $300 worth of weed. Fuck your plea offer. Let's go to trial. And
wow. So you mentioned that. So the plea deal was only on one marijuana charge. It wasn't on the other gun charges and things of that nature.
Yeah, they said that would disappear. So first, they were hoping that Pressure Me would get all kinds of rappers. When that didn't happen, they said, okay, the best we're going to give you is 15 years, or we're going to trial and you're going to face a century of incarceration. And when we said, okay, we're going to trial, I'm not accepting any of your offers, we're going to trial. Now they have to do whatever they can to win, because they knew a lot of the charges were BS. The gun stuff, fabricated. I owned them, didn't take them with me anywhere. So basically they had to do whatever they had to do to win. And they used hip hop, because back then, gangster rap, it had a stigma still, it wasn't as mainstream as today. And when we picked the jury, we had an all-white Mormon jury. And so at that point, I was scared to death. One of the jurors told the judge that they were fearful of their safety in this case. And at that point, I knew that I was probably going to lose.
Right. And they're quoting lyrics. They're doing your trial. You said they did the Mac Dre song.
Yeah. So after trial, to closing arguments, the prosecutor opened his closing statement by rapping the Mac Dre song. I produced an album with Mac Dre and a bunch of songs, but this album, he had a song called Shaking the Feds. And the prosecutor started rapping it. And he said, shaking the Fed, making the bread, or whatever. And when he finished, he said, this is what this case is all about. And he had a picture up there, and it had like East Siders clothing, LBC, West Side, all this stuff. telling the jury this is gang stuff. I mean, I think they attributed me to like 3 different gangs, some that don't even exist. And so they were so desperate to get this, to win this case. One, because I said no to them. Two, to make me like the poster child of the George W. Bush tough on crime policies.
Right, right. So you're sitting there, and once you hear him starting rapping the Mac Dre lyrics, it's not looking good for you. What was
No.
that moment like? What were, can you even take us back to that feeling to know when that sentence is coming down?
Yeah, so I mean, the worst part of everything is when I heard the jury read the verdicts. And I lost the easiest charges with the informant lying about a gun that he never mentioned till 6 months later. And when I lost on those, you know, my attorney looked at me and said, "That's 55 years." I won the guns in the home. When they went to my house and said, "Oh, you got these guns here. You're using them to protect your drugs and money and all that crap." Because I had a lot of legal money, you know. At this point in time, my career was doing very well, and I was doing a lot of AR work, promotion, and producing records. And so, you know, I beat those counts, but you know, I lost the other 3. And then my attorney looked at me and said, "It's 55 years." And so, you know, sentencing didn't happen for some months later. But what happened was, you know, we were given some hope. My judge was a very conservative, tough on crime, George W. Bush appointee, a member of the Federalist Society. For anyone that don't know who the Federalist Society is, those are the Trump judges who he was appointing. My judge was a member of that organization. And so he was terrible at trial. He denied all our pretrial motions, suppression motions. But before sentencing, he surprised us and the rest of the legal community in the nation by speaking out against the sentence that he felt he was forced to impose. And so he had sent us signals that he was thinking about calling my sentence unconstitutional and giving me whatever sentence he felt was appropriate. And so when sentencing came, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what was going to happen. My judge had reached out to the jury. He had reached out to the legal community for help. And at the end of the day, he felt his hands were tied by the mandatory minimums, but he did one thing no federal judge had ever done at that point. He called on the president that appointed him to commute my sentence as he was sentencing me, called on Congress to change the laws that forced him to give me a 55-year sentence. And so when I heard those words, I have no choice. I knew, you know, I was getting the minimum. And so, but I was given hope when he asked the president to intervene and commute my sentence. It never happened. Bush left office and didn't do it, but that was hope that our family continued to believe that somebody would intervene.
Right, right. So you mentioned something there. The judge had an option to say that your sentence was unconstitutional, and that may have triggered his ability to sentence you to something that he thought was more appropriate.
Yeah, so if he ruled the sentence was cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the 8th Amendment, he could have given me whatever punishment he felt was appropriate. However, the law of the land and the Supreme Court precedent would not have sustained that ruling. And if he would have done that, the higher court would have overturned it and I would have went back into prison for the same sentence. So he felt the best thing he could do was go down kicking and screaming. And basically, he wrote a 67-page sentencing memorandum that basically made a case for clemency that we were able to use when Obama was elected. That, you know, when we got to that point, you know, years after, you know, I've been in prison, you know, we were able to use his views on my sentence to get me out.
Right. I see a quote here from him, and it says, "Cruel, unjust, and irrational." And that's a sentence that he handed down. Although I guess from the perspective that his hands was tied in the minimum sentencing guidelines.
Yep, his hands were tied. A mandatory minimum means just that. It's mandatory. Judges don't have discretion, only in very limited circumstances, which weren't present in my case. But by him speaking out like he did and literally calling on the president as he was imposing punishment to intervene was huge. And it, you know, it caused the legal community to come around, rally around my case. And basically I became a cause célèbre for the legal community. And, you know, we were able to launch a very large bipartisan coalition to get me out of jail based on my judge's views. And it also opened up the minds of other conservatives who are usually tough on crime, you know, senators or members of Congress, to look at this and say, okay, he may be onto something. This man is the most tough on crime judge. and he's saying this, we need to listen to what he's saying.
Right, right. So during your sentencing, he's giving you just a little nugget of hope. That seems like very contradictory that you were sentenced to 55 years, but there was something there that you could hang on to, a little bit of hope. Talk about that and just how that even, what did you end up doing, 14, 15 years?
I did 13 years, and it was the only hope I had. When I lost my appeals, the only thing I could hope is that somebody, some president or a member of Congress or a new prosecutor, somebody's going to look at what happened and say, this is wrong, this is bullshit. The prosecutors went overboard on this little case. Let's do something about it. And ultimately, that's what happened. There was a prosecutor in that office named Mike Lee. He didn't agree with his colleague. He was not in charge of my case. That was his case. But he looked at it and he said, this is ridiculous. It's too long. And so when that man left the U.S. Attorney's office, he ran for the Senate in 2010 and he was elected. And he remembered what my judge said to him and he didn't forget it. And so when he was elected to the Senate, he decided to do something about it. And so he had reached out to my family, had reached out to other members of Congress like Cory Booker to form an alliance so they could do something not only to get me out, but to change the law that got me 55 years.
And what was that law that got you 55 years?
It was 924C, which is a gun stacking statute. If you're a drug offender, even if you own a legal gun, they'll stack your sentences. You'll get 5 years for the first count and 25 each subsequent account, even if it was in the same day, same indictment, it doesn't matter. And the law was not supposed to operate that way. And so, we sort of, I became the poster child for that law and just reform in general. And so while I'm sitting in prison, I'm like, I buried myself in law books and, I wasn't in there just, playing dominoes all the time. I did that, but I was mostly focused on getting out. And so I built a coalition to do that. We were able to get, Mike Lee, Cory Booker, 3 other senators, people like Alicia Keys and Bonnie Raitt and Snoop, Mike Epps, and then a bunch of former prosecutors and judges rallied behind me and pushed to President Obama to intervene in my case.
Wow. And speak a little bit about sort of the work behind getting together this bipartisan coalition, because that's very important and seems like almost impossible to do nowadays. Talk about the strategy there and sort of the work.
Well, we sort of had to frame my case in a way that made people want to be involved. And so, some people were really right-wing conservatives that we were pitching it to. And so we just framed my story in a way, I'm a music producer selling small amounts of cannabis and own legal firearms. That should anger pro-Second Amendment activists. It should anger people on both sides. Republicans care about liberty and progressives care about justice. And so this is a bipartisan issue. And so we were able to, frame my case in a way that made other people want to get involved. And, I was in the entertainment industry, so a lot of them rallied behind me and came on board. And it just kept going bigger. My judge kept speaking out. He went, after he quit over my case, he said it weighed on him too hard. And he went on ABC Nightline and talked about it. And he said, it still haunts him. And, the Washington Post did like 3 cover stories on my case. So I had the media really helping me and it helped, having all these supporters, but mostly it was my judge doing what he did. He saved me. And so when President Obama was elected and he heard about the case, it was compelling to him and he intervened.
And speaking about some of the facts in your case, they're so just mind-boggling. And you were a person that was already in this music industry, so you had a certain connections in the celebrity field. It seemed like it took everything, all these sort of perfect alignments to even get your story at the forefront. How does this compare to all the other prisoners sitting in locked up now for cannabis offenses, and how difficult that road is for their story to be told?
Yeah, and that's sort of the problem. Not everyone in prison has celebrity friends or senators willing to go fight for them. And so I knew I had to be that voice for them. When I got out and I knew I was getting out, people in there were like, don't forget about us. There were people in there who were in there for a legal dispensary. I know a guy that had 22 years for following state law in California. and he just got targeted by the feds for, making a rap video. And so when I was leaving, everyone in there, looked up to me and respected me for what I was doing behind bars. They said, look, you got this network and this platform, you got to use it to help us. And so when I got out, instead of trying to get back in music, which, I thought about, I decided, I need to make the most of this network and this coalition that I was able to build. And when I got out, I did just that. I hit the ground running because everyone in there doesn't have a voice. So, somebody has to get out and be able to bring attention to those cases. And that's what I did. The people that helped me out, we call it unlikely allies. And so we sort of use that when I got out to help change law. And, I brought my entertainer friends like Snoop Dogg and them over to the people on the right that helped me, like Senator Mike Lee. And then when Trump was elected, we were invited to the White House to be a part of this criminal justice coalition. And things just took off. We were able to pass what's called the First Step Act. And it was bipartisan. We worked with Cory Booker and President Trump's team, Jared Kushner, Van Jones, and we passed this bill that reformed the statute that gave me 55 years. So prosecutors cannot do that to anyone ever again. It's over with. But one thing that the First Step Act didn't do, it didn't benefit people who were in prison for purely cannabis cases. And because of that, when I knew First Step Act was going to pass, I launched an initiative to focus exclusively on people in prison for cannabis.
And the name of that initiative?
It's Project Mission Green.
Mission Green. And so the focus there is hopefully we can get all the nonviolent cannabis offenders home.
Yeah, well, a cannabis case by definition is nonviolent. And if there's a violent charge, then it's a separate charge. But yes, the goal of Project Mission Green is to get everyone out of jail who's in there for cannabis. And so in November of 2018, we were actually starting to build it before that, but we started to launch it around then. And we were very successful because, we had the right political contacts and we had the entertainers to help get behind us. We just needed the cannabis industry and they were slow to the fight, you know what I mean? But we did what we could. And even though we were working with President Trump, we were able to get a lot of people out, even on his last day. We partnered up we were working with Ivanka Trump directly. And we supported, 12 cases that were ultimately granted. And by working with Alice Johnson and Ivanka Trump and Jared's office. We were very successful also in the courts. And on the way, during this process, I also got out a couple of my hip hop peers, like former Bad Boy Records rapper Loon, the co-founder of Death Row Records, Harry O. So we were able to get them out as well. And we're working on others. But yeah, we were very successful using clemency as a tool and using the First Step Act, provision called compassionate release.
You worked on Loon's case as well. He received.
Yeah, I got Loon out. No, we filed clemency for his, and they were going to grant it on Father's Day, but the COVID, the riots, everything that happened pushed it back. And so I put together a compassionate release motion for Loon, and it was granted in July. I think the judge granted it in like 45 days after I filed it.
Right. Amazing. So back it up a little bit, because you said something that was very important there. You are released and you hit the ground running. Talk about a little bit about, you knew that were coming. How did your release happen and sort of the mindset there?
Yeah, so I kept getting passed up for clemency after clemency. Obama would do 100, and like 3 months later he'd do 90, 80. I just kept getting passed up. And Mike Lee stepped up the pressure, and I got a call that my release was imminent. And I think it was like a month before it happened. And I didn't expect to get out even that fast. So, I was able to, kind of help some of the people I was in there get their clemency petitions tightened up, because I was working with the best legal team. And so I had that experience and knowledge. I even got people clemency before I got out. I was doing their petitions. And so when I knew I was getting out, we started working real tough on Luke Scarmazzo and his co-defendant Ricardo Montes on their clemency petitions. And we were able to get one of them out during Obama's term. And now Luke is still in prison. So we're still fighting for him.
Where did you serve your time?
Lompoc, USP. And it's kind of by Santa Barbara.
Okay. So you hit the ground 2013, you're back out. and you become a
No, I
fierce
got out in 2016.
16. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, 2016.
Yeah. I apologize for that. So 2016, you're out and you hit the ground running. Talk to us a little bit about the Weldon Project and the focus of that.
Yeah, so the Weldon Project, we formed to be a more broad-based organization for criminal justice. It's a 501c3 organization, and we work on everything from mandatory minimum reforms to cannabis reform, reentry. So it's sort of a broad-based policy organization. We launched the Mission Green Initiative to put cannabis cases in the focus because we feel like they were passed up in the previous administration, and we feel like people in prison for cannabis, this is the most deserving category of offender in my view, because you have people making tons of money, and the system picks winners and losers, and usually the losers are minorities and people from poor communities. And so you have people like Boris Jordan, who's a billionaire, and then you have my friend Rollo, the rapper Rollo in Atlanta. He's facing 9 years for violating the same federal statute. And so that hypocrisy is something that I want to end. And given that I have these connections, I had to use them to try to do that. And we're really close to ending it for everybody. And so one thing that I've done recently I forgot to mention that Charles Koch from the Koch brothers actually was a major factor in my release. They sort of got behind me in 2014 to try to amplify my case for Congress to pass these laws. And so with them and Mike Lee, I decided that I needed to reach out to them for help passing the MORE Act, because if we pass the MORE Act, all of them come home, and all this clemency effort is not needed. And so passing the MORE Act would solve the whole problem, at least on the federal side.
And are you feeling optimistic about that currently? How do you feel about the potential for the MORE Act passing?
I was pessimistic at first because the Democrats have the 50 votes. Doesn't mean all 50 will vote for him, but you need 60 to pass a bill. So you're going to need 10 Republicans at a minimum, if not 12. And so what I knew we had to do, given my contacts with the Koch brothers and all the Republicans, they fund each election cycle. I think he spends, $600 million an election cycle. I had to reach out to them for help. I know that Charles Koch believes in legalizing all drugs. And so I reached out to them saying, we need to do something about this. And they agreed, and they're going to get behind us and try to get those 10 or 12 Republicans to vote in favor of the MORE Act, or whatever it's called, when the Senate introduces the new version this year.
Right. And I guess that may be a harder fight. What are your thoughts on sort of the option for the Biden administration right now and potentially issuing a mass pardon for offenders?
Yeah, so one thing that we came up with a couple months ago, there's precedent for categorical pardons. President Ford did it, President Carter did it. A couple months ago, I got together with the industry and the advocacy organizations that I work with, and we came up with this strategy that we could put together a proclamation for Joe Biden that would grant a general pardon to anyone convicted of a federal cannabis offense. And so we organized support with members of Congress, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and the congressman from Oregon. We kind of did this together. We sent 2 letters in the second week of February, one with the advocacy organizations and the trade associations, and one with members of Congress. I think 12 of them signed on. And we argued that he should do something similar to what Ford and Carter did, and grant pardons to people in there for cannabis offenses, because President Biden said this on the campaign trail. And so we wanted to partner with the right organizations and the right members of Congress to get this done. And right now we just had Drake sign on to our next letter that we're submitting. We have Drake, 2 Chainz, T.I., Killer Mike, and all these big names, and people that were formerly in the DOJ that are going to make this big next effort that we're about to do in the next couple of weeks, along with a major billboard campaign and a clemency event that we're organizing. So we were going to keep the pressure up. We're not going to let Joe say no. He literally said this in the debates and on the campaign trail, that he doesn't believe in recreational or adult use, but he says no one should be in prison for marijuana, no one should have a felony. Well, we're going to hold him to that, and we're just organizing the entertainment industry to get together to keep that pressure on him.
And that's something he can do unilaterally. That doesn't need the Senate, that doesn't need Congress. So that's I think an incredible option. And like you said, using sort of his own words and his own promises on a campaign trail.
Absolutely. He could do it with the stroke of a pen.
Absolutely. And talk a little bit about, just to give some insight there, you spoke of precedent, previous presidents using this sort of not a singular pardon, but more of a mass pardon. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what President Ford did, and then Carter later, is President Ford, he drafted a proclamation that pardoned certain draft evaders. Now, if you remember the Vietnam War, some of the people didn't want to go fight because it was a meaningless war. So some people left the country. Others just hid out in the country. And so Ford granted a general pardon to all the people who didn't leave the country. And when Carter was elected, he pardoned all of them as a way for the country to move on and heal. Well, right now we need to move on from prohibition and we need to heal. And so, there's precedent for Biden to do the exact same thing they did.
Right. And what role do you think the cannabis industry, the private cannabis industry, can have in this fight as well?
Well, they need to fund it. They need to get behind the real activists, the real organizations that have been on the ground for years doing this, and they need to rally behind people like myself, people like Corvain Cooper, people who've been through this. We need to be the voice because we've experienced it ourselves. My friend said it best: the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so the industry needs to get behind us. They need to fund it. They need to support the people who are still in prison, suffering these injustices, and help get them out and get their lives back. Because a lot of these stories, mine included, and Corvain's, help move the needle in favor of legalization across the country. And so, they should get behind us and help what we're doing. And so that's what we're relying on. And slowly, they're starting to do it.
That's what I was going to ask. Have you actually found that a lot of the leading cannabis industry players are been receptive to this message?
Yes, they're starting to now. I think, a couple of years ago we weren't there, but I think now they're starting to step up, and they're starting to realize that they can't just sit on the sideline. They have to step up and do something.
Right, absolutely. And it seems like also part of this advocacy, strictly business, right? If you can move this forward to a legalization, it'll open doors for everyone. At least we'll hope, right? And speaking
Yeah.
about that a little bit, talk about you now have a full pardon from Donald Trump. So you were pardoned in December 20th. So that means that you have no record, correct?
No, I still have a record. I just don't have any collateral consequences, or basically I can own a gun. I can do anything anyone else can do. The fact of my conviction remains, and this is in part because of the Supreme Court. When they initially interpreted the pardon power, they said a pardon is like an exoneration. However, in 1970, after the Iran-Contra affair, they walked back that interpretation and said, a pardon, it removes you from the conviction, but the fact of the conviction remains. So it doesn't expunge it, basically. But I'm as free as I can be, and I'll accept that. And my pardon was earned. I did a lot of work when I got out. I didn't think about myself, my own career. I put everything else aside and focus on this. And so, when the White House granted it, they said it was for, all the advocacy I've done. So I'll definitely take that.
Well, thanks for that clarity there. So filling out paperwork, they ask you, are you a felon? You can check no.
Well, yeah, if they say am I a felon, I could say no. If they say have I ever been convicted, I have to say yes. But I can note that I was pardoned. Right. And now they're getting tricky. They'll ask you, have you ever been convicted, rather than are you a felon? So if they say am I a felon, I can say no. But if they say you ever been convicted of a felony, I have to say yes. But then I can explain that it was pardoned. So there's a lot of benefits to being pardoned, but an expungement is what we need. And expungements remove it completely, where you don't even have to disclose it. And so we're working on an expungement bill as well, right, nationally.
And just listen to hear you speak, and the amount of information and a passion for this. Did you ever imagine that you would be in this place, as an advocate and not as a musician?
No, never. I never thought I'd be in the White House, much less, have, under my belt everything I've accomplished everywhere I've been. I always dreamed about going into the White House and even being pardoned, like when I was in prison, and all of it came true. And going into the White House as a guest, not as a tourist, um, was a better feeling than I think anything I've ever experienced. I think better than even going to Snoop's house for the first time. Walking in there, the place is majestic, and just being there, and they want to listen to you. Like it was it was an amazing feeling, and to help change law that affects thousands of people across the country. I think 16,000 people have been released because of the First Step Act. So, I think being an advocate, while it doesn't pay, so like the music industry does, there's no pay. It's more fulfilling and meaningful. And so I probably wouldn't go back and change any of it.
Wow, that's amazing. So, like I said, this season we've been focusing on free the people. It's the essential part in this cannabis industry. In a sum, in a sentence or two, what does free the people mean to Weldon Angelos?
Man, it means everybody should be free, and no one should be in prison for a plant. I think this whole drug war was based on false premise, especially for marijuana. Everyone knows marijuana is less harmful than alcohol. People have been using it for hundreds of years. And it's time to end it now.
You just mentioned some false premise. When you say false premise, talk a little bit about that and sort of the war on drugs, the war on cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, the argument used for prohibiting cannabis was false. It's not harmful. Even the original doctors that that looked into this said no, it's not harmful. And so and all the reasons they used to justify it, a lot of it was racially motivated. I mean, the real war on drugs started in 1970, but cannabis, the first time prohibition was introduced was in 1937, but it was a tax law, so it wasn't like as enforceable as it was in 1970. When the war on drugs was really kicked off, and there was a lot of racial motivation behind the whole war on drugs. And so it's time not just to end prohibition, but to end the war on drugs completely. I think everybody should be able to use what they want to use, as long as they're not harming someone else.
Right, great. So tell us, how everyone out here in the community, how can we get behind the push to hold the Biden administration accountable and put sort of the pressure to them?
Yeah, so they can go to the weldonproject.org, follow us on Instagram at Project Mission Green. We're going to be launching a new site that's going to let everyone know how they can get involved, how they can be a part of this push. We're about to launch something with Drake and other people. Even the rapper Russ is getting involved. And so we have a lot of projects coming up. And we're really excited about it. I think we're really close to ending prohibition finally, but I think we're even closer to ending incarceration for cannabis, and especially on the federal level.
That would be great. And a lot of these projects are taking place this year. You feel the push is going to be now?
Absolutely. I think if it doesn't happen this year, I think 2023 is our year.
All right. I appreciate it. Weldon Angelos, thank you for joining us. Great conversation. Weldonproject.com, correct?
The weldonproject.org.
.org. And they can find out about Mission Green as well there?
Yep.
Absolutely.
And we're a 501c3, so any donations are tax deductible. So please donate, support the cause. We're out here doing the real work. Everyone a part of the Weldon Project have been directly impacted by the system. That's what makes us unique.
Really?
Yes.
That's great. And hit me with that quote one more time. The people who are closer to it, what did you say? The people
the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from the resources and power. That's why the industry needs to get behind the people who are closest to the problem, because we know the solution.
Right. I love that. Thank you, Weldon. I appreciate the conversation. Please stay in touch. We'll love to assist any way we can.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a